You're not just going to walk up to some random people and start talking about your grandparents' story, and in the hopes of finding some random connection. But
although I have to be honest, Sean, I feel like I have started to become a crazy genealogy lady, because I won't hit you with it right away. But at least, towards the end of a conversation, I might be like, so your last name is really familiar. I have someone in my family tree with that last name. Is your family from, Norway? Are they from this? Are they? And
you set up their family search account right there in front of them.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sean and I am the founder of Murrieta Films, where we're all about creating connections between generations in the family. And that's what we talk about here on this video podcast as we talk with professionals, researchers, people who are doing work in the intergenerational space. And that's why today I'm so excited to be joined by Aimee Edgeworth. And Aimee's got quite the resume. We've had the privilege of working together on some projects. She is the founder of the Pearl Center for Creative Arts, which is based in Murrieta, California. It's the first cultural arts center actually in Murrieta. She's also the chief engineer of the Murrieta Train Project. Wait till you hear about this. This is pretty incredible what she's working on. And she's also the mother of four, married for almost 22 years now. And she also really wanted me to include this in her bio, that she is one of the nominees for Murrieta's Volunteer of the Year. She gives back so much to her community. And certainly, from the minute that we met Aimee, which we'll talk about even how we met, I knew that there was a kindred spirit around intergenerational connection, certainly the work that you're doing through your organization, which I'm excited to talk with you about. But before we get into any of that, I have to ask you, like I do all my guests, no pressure here, but if you had to tell your life story, your entire life story in under 5 minutes, how would you do it? Go.
That is really hard, because if you know anything about me, it's hard for me to say any story in less than 5 minutes. But born in Vancouver, British Columbia, the only Canadian in my family, traveled down the West Coast. My parents got divorced when I was 4, and that's when my grandpa really stepped it up and became a huge part of our life growing up. Raised by a single mom, we did move around a lot, but he was always there for us and a constant in our life, and always lightening the mood with his crazy stories and just his importance of family. Like, that was everything to him growing up. So ended up in Southern California, back where it all kind of started, and decided, you know what, I really want to follow in those footsteps and do something important in Southern California and really learn as much as I can about local history and, make this our home. We moved to Nashville for a few years and nobody thought they'd see us again, but we came back, not just to Southern California, but back to our hometown of Murrieta, of all places, and, have just really worked to create the lives that we always wanted for ourselves and for raising our kids in what was a boring city as a teenager, but now as a parent is like, I love that it's safe in that kind of boring sense. I don't know if that was 5 minutes. I could keep going, but
way under 5 minutes. Yeah, I feel like now I have so many questions.
Fast.
No. That's so it's funny. I mean, both of us come from divorced families young, and had grandparents involved. I'm curious, was your grandfather a big storyteller? Did you guys, it sounds like you have very fond memories of him and his involvement in the family.
Definitely. I admit that when I was very young, I was terribly afraid of him. I would hide behind my mom. I was scared to death. And eventually I got over that. Obviously, he was always a jokester and a prankster, fabulous storyteller. He grew up telling us, showing us how you can, remove your thumb, like in this weird trick. But then we'd say, oh, that's, we kind of got over that quickly. And then he would take off his shoe and say, well, look, I can do that with my toe as well. And he'd show us his missing toe and go on to tell us the story of how he was growing up in the Ozarks, chopping wood barefoot at age 12 and chopped off his big toe, and how his aunt tried to sew it back on and it turned purple and fell off. So especially as a kid, that was a very vivid story. And, when you've got the missing toe being waved in your face and you and your friends are all screaming and running out of the room, that was the kind of memories that he brought. I mean, he would walk up to you with his hands closed like this, real tight, and he would not say a single word. And he would just walk up and put his hands right in front of your face and then open them. And there would either be nothing, or it would be a crane fly, or a lizard tail, or a
Oh my
spider.
gosh.
Like, it was just, you just never knew what to expect. That was fun, though. He really injected a lot of fun into our family, and especially with my biological father not being around in those formative
Mm,
years, I think it was really important, for my sisters and my brother and I all to have that kind of playfulness that, I feel like other people might relate to their dads.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. That's so cool that you had him around. And, I know that your family history is an integral part of the work that you do and really the inspiration behind your organization, Pearl Center for Creative Arts. So, for those who don't know what the Pearl Center for Creative Arts is, which I'm guessing is probably going to be the majority of people watching this video, can you just share with them just what it is that your organization does and a little bit of how your personal family history is woven into that mission?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I admit that I was a good student in school, but I was terrible at history. So remembering names and dates and all of that has just always been incredibly challenging for me. So the idea of family history, has always been a little bit daunting as well, too. My mom, my grandpa would share all kinds of stories, and it's just something that I've personally struggled with recalling those details. I
Hmm.
know now that I'm not the only one that has a hard time remembering those stories, especially when, as a kid or teenager, you have other things on your mind that you want to go off and do. But, really the impetus was, how do we keep these stories alive? How do we get people to
Hmm.
even want to remember those details? And I kind
Hmm.
of stumbled on it a little bit accidentally. I had volunteered at my kids' school to paint the backdrops for their school musical. And I've always been artistic, but I'd never done anything so big as that. But nobody else raised their hand in the room. So I'm just like, okay, I'll do it. These are elementary school kids. They can't be too
Yeah.
judgy, right? And all of a sudden, I was painting two giant 16 by 20-foot canvas panels in my basement. This was in Nashville, and the whole backstage and a whole ship, and orchestrating these set build days with over 100 student volunteers. Mind you, these are elementary school student volunteers.
Hmm.
So everybody wanted to paint something, and it was wild, but it was so much fun, and I got a lot of really positive feedback about the painting. And so as soon as that wrapped up, I was like, I'm going and getting as many canvases as I can, but not just little ones, like big giant ones, whatever I could
Wow.
afford. And then I felt like it was definitely a sign that all of the canvases were like 70% off when I showed up at the store. I'm like, that is an amazing sale. How did I time? Like 70% off? That's crazy.
70% off. Yeah.
I was like seven
Yeah.
zero. And
Yeah.
so I've literally filled up the whole back of the car with as many canvases as I could. But then it's always that trouble as an artist of like, well, what do I paint? Like, I've got all the
Hmm.
supplies now. What do I do? How am I
Yeah.
inspired? And my mom had actually been sending me all of these old photographs of my grandpa's side of the family. And I thought, oh, okay, this is cool. Like, these are people that I could paint. And, just to be quite honest, it's like, these are people I could paint and they won't judge me because they passed away like 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely a theme here. I think other artists can relate that sometimes we're really have a lot
Hmm.
of self doubt, or our own worst critics. So this idea of having like some safe models, so to speak, to paint, really
Sure.
comforted me as I was developing this. And then something just amazing happened, that as I was painting these ancestral photos, I just got more curious about them and was calling my mom and asking her, and humbly apologizing that I know you've told me the story of Pearl 100 times before, and I ought
Hmm.
to remember it all, but now I'm painting her and I really am more curious. Like, what was the deal with her? Why
Hmm.
did grandpa talk about her? Why do you talk about her? At the time, my mom was even starting to write historical fiction book about her based on letters that Pearl had written home to. It would have been my, great 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 grandparents, some greatness of that sort.
Yeah.
So it really was exciting to learn those details. And I know that it really gave my mom a lot of joy to share those stories and to
Mm.
feel like there was a receptive audience to it. I get sometimes we're like story pushers. We just want to like push our stories onto anybody that'll listen.
Mm.
And it's hard because not everybody cares the way we do when we're
Mm.
telling a story. And I really changed the narrative in those conversations where I did finally care because I felt like a connection through just the art and the paintings. And it got me thinking, wow, if I am so bad at history that I cannot remember dates of wars or generals or this or that, but I can all of a sudden like pivot and remember the details of Pearl's life, of the year she was born, the year she passed, like all of these things.
Mm.
Maybe other people can too. Maybe there's a different entry point into family history or even just history in general that would
Yeah.
allow people to recall those details because it's more personal. So that was really a big impetus for starting this Pearl Center, which is what I call kind of like an umbrella of family history, local history, and community arts projects. So it's not just enough to like listen to those family stories because we all know what happens if you just sit there as a passive listener. It just
Yeah.
passes through you.
Sure.
So if you hear that story, but then do something with it, for me, it was painting.
Mm.
And it gave me this just magic connection to the names and dates and facts that I would have otherwise not been able to
Yeah.
recall. And so I really hope to inspire that for other people by having this cultural arts center that, is in honor of Pearl because her story and that experience had such a huge impact on me in my own understanding of our family history that I want to help other people find that too. And I think that there's, even just in personal conversation, there's so many people that don't think they know about family history or anything about their own
Yeah.
family, but then you get them talking and all of a
Mm.
sudden they're sharing all of these stories. So,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
in there. It's just like I said, having the right audience can
Mm.
sometimes be a challenge.
I'm curious as I listen to you talk about your fascination with your own family history. Our viewers might be sitting there thinking, yeah, so what? Like that more about Pearl or any of your family. Like, what's the point for anybody to really dive deep into their family history? So for you personally, what has it done for you in your character and just your emotional mental health? Like what kind of benefits have you seen and felt and experienced personally through uncovering your family history and getting to know it more?
I love that. And that's funny that you say that you ask that because everybody in my family and people in my social circles are like, wow, you just seem so happy since you've been embarking on this new project and working on this cultural arts center.
Hmm.
And that says more than anything is like what other people are noticing that was just kind of dismissed because you're so
Hmm.
absorbed in the project. For me, just learning about Pearl was fascinating. I think that some of us that just kind of like to geek out on research, whether it's avoiding reality or because you just like get a keen fascination in ancient
Hmm.
Egypt. For me it was just kind of one of those next things to go on a deep dive of like, okay, let's learn as much as I can about this person. And it had always been told as kind of a tragic story because Pearl had passed away at the age of 24 as a
Hmm.
new bride of only 6 months. And she suffered. She passed from tuberculosis, and so there
Oh
was
wow.
a lot of pain leading up until her death. And then for passing away in 1894 and coming from rural Minnesota, the amount of attention that her funeral drew from the community. I mean, the letters that my mom had been passed down from this scrapbook. It was just amazing how this 24-year-old school teacher from rural Minnesota could impact so many different lives. And so it kind of changed the course of emotion for me of like, this is not a sad story. It's a beautiful story. Like, yeah, she didn't have children of her own with her husband, but she was a school teacher. And at that time, she was a school teacher from the age of 16 is when you could start teaching. So she had, almost a decade's worth of children that she helped influence. And so it's really important for me, for us in modern day times, to accept the tragedies of the past, and Pearl's tragedy is hard, but you read other parts of your family tree, and I mean, there's murders, there's deaths of all, I have a relative that was shot in a poker match in Los Angeles because he came to demand money that somebody else owed him, and the guy just pulled a gun on him and shot him. And this was actually like a newspaper article because it was a big decision on whether the man that shot my ancestor was held liable for that because my ancestor called him a bad name or said something bad about his mom. And at that time, he got off. He was not convicted of murder because my ancestor called his mom some kind of insult.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
So, I mean, there's definitely parts of our history that are not charming and necessarily fun to read, but it's those stories especially that I feel like people shouldn't shy away from. And where that kind of really connects me to modern day times is that I'm part of this group called the National Charity League, which is mother-daughter volunteers. And one of our members that's in my daughter's class of 2025 passed away a few years ago. And it was sudden, it was sad, and it was painful for everybody. And yet, as 14-year-olds, they're having to navigate how you talk about that. How do you talk about somebody that is gone without breaking down in tears? How do you allow their family to keep those memories alive? And at this little girl's funeral, I think it was like over 1,000 people showed up.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I mean, I think so many of us as adults would have a hard time getting even 100 people to show up at a funeral. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but it's these stories and these people, men, women, children, we shouldn't shy away from talking about their lives just because they're not living anymore. And with Pearl and that Victorian period, there was such a emphasis on this sentimentality of life and death. I mean, death was in your face all the time. So all of these weird rituals they would do with like hair jewelry or postmortem photography or things like that we might look back and be like, ew, that's weird or creepy or like, why would they do that? You do, like with all history, have to just go back to that time period and be like, you know what? It's because family was so important to them. That these were mementos, the only things they could hold on to physically that would help keep those memories alive. So it's really a cool connection to the past that I don't think a lot of people realize. All those weird traditions are really like very sweet.
Yeah, totally. And going back to kind of what people are noticing about you, which, there's a change in your demeanor, just your joy, you could say. And a big part of that is just your connection to your family history. And a lot of the research that I've been doing in recent weeks would come 100% support what you're saying. And in fact, there's lots of research that shows a connection between kids knowing their family history and their overall, their resilience, their confidence, their like ability to persevere through tough times, challenges, like just from being connected to a story that's bigger than just your own. And I think, we talk about society at large, we've become so individualized to where like, it almost feels like, I don't know if you agree with this, but if it feels like culture at large is saying, forget the past, you can blaze your own trail. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter what happened before you. And I think the research says the exact opposite of that we actually need, we're better off when we know what's come before us, and that we actually learn from those experiences, and even the trauma. I love that you bring that up, because even in sharing some of this research, I mean, I get comments from people like, well, yeah, but you need to have boundaries with what you talk about. And people are afraid. My own grandparents, I mean, maybe they're watching this sometime in the future, I don't know. Hopefully one day I get to document their story on video, because they're a bit hesitant to get on camera. And I think in large part because there's some trauma that they don't know how to talk about. They never have talked about it. They've kind of just brushed it under the rug. And so anyway, I'm going on a little rabbit trail here, but I think
No,
it's,
I
yeah.
like that. It's a good point, because what I've really noticed in a lot of these firsthand discussions, at events I do or places I show up, there is a huge disconnect with our past. And what I've discovered is that there was this period of, maybe 2 to 3 generations that worked really hard to erase their cultural background, who were doing
Hmm.
that for this kind of idea of protection of their children, of giving their children a better life, at least in America, because there were times when you were really treated differently if you had an accent, if you spoke a different language, if you celebrated customs that were different than the norm, or, any of those things that make us beautiful individuals, that tie us to those ancestral, energies and stories and all of that. And so there's so much repair work that has to be done, and it's these grandmas and great grandmas that are willing to break the silence and share the hardships of what it took for their families to come to America or the United States, of what languages they used to speak, of what traditions were there, because
Hmm.
that was one of the big things that I felt growing up in Southern California and being born in Canada, but not even being Canadian, was like, who am I?
Yeah.
Everybody comes to California or to the States of this cultural melting pot, they used to call it. But I've been here, my family's been here since like the 1700s. So I'm just white. I'm just
Yeah.
boring. I have nothing that I can be proud of because I'm just like here. And it was taking that deep dive into the background and realizing, okay, maybe I have to go back to the 1700s, but everybody came from somewhere else. And you might have to research a little bit longer to get to those beginnings. But it made me just feel a lot more, I don't know, just a lot more connected to know that, yes, on the surface, I look very white and very
Hmm.
Canadian
Hmm.
or whatever. But I
Yeah.
have this rich history of, German people, Scandinavian,
Yeah.
Indigenous American, and Mexico. And so it's like, I really think that these connections that we feel with cultures, whether it's food or art or just a love for people or a place, it really can maybe be traced back to some point in our actual ancestry. That's like, I mean, a lot of people love Mexican food. I get it. But I've always, I did my
Yeah. Yeah.
senior thesis on the history of modern Mexico and art. And it's just like, I didn't even realize at the time that I had a connection to that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Even though I admit, I'm sure my mom told me like 100 times that her, great great grandmother was Mexican. So but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
takes discovering it for yourself to like really have that impact, I think.
I'm really glad that you brought up, just kind of how you uncovered some of your genealogy and maybe some of the geographical roots that you have in your blood. I know that the work that you do at Pearl Center for Creative Arts, it's really about giving people an inroad to learning more about their family history, right? Through art and other, avenues. So tell me a little bit about, what you guys do and how you would maybe suggest to someone who is interested in learning about their family history, like where should they start? Where are some places that they could start?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And really, people can become a beginning genealogist at any age. But what I've been really working at in our community is kind of bridging that generational gap. As you and I have talked about with our relationships with our grandparents, as a teenager, it's really difficult to be as interested as we feel like we should be later in life. And so I've really targeted some programs towards teenagers in Murrieta, and I love good puns and crazy, silly program names. So I came up with Teenealogy as an idea
Yes.
to get teenagers interested in genealogy. And the most surprising aspect was how many students actually showed up to these classes and workshops and were so excited and so curious. And
Yeah.
students in these classes asking me if it was okay for them to call their grandma or grandpa and ask them when they were born or ask them who their parents were. And I was like, yes, in this class, use your cell phone all you want to call grandma, grandpa, whoever, to get those details. So people just really need that starting point. It's intimidating
Mm-hmm.
of how to start. So being able to, just help guide people that sometimes, to start, you just really need to grab the basic information, but not everyone has
Mm-hmm.
access to that. So grandma, grandpa's names, even, some people might not know
Mm-hmm.
their grandma's maiden name or have no idea the years that they were born. So getting that basic information is such a great way to not only start your family tree, but to start engaging in those conversations with anybody who's still alive to tell those stories. So that's kind of the twofold is like, hey teens, like let's get you started on learning how to build your digital family tree. And then as a default, they kind of are forced into those conversations as well. Because if I
Yeah.
called it a class of call grandma and grandpa once a week, nobody's going to show up to that class. But essentially, that's kind of what ended up happening with
Yeah.
this. And then the crossover between the family history and the art component for these workshops has been at the end of our sessions, whether it's a month or a week, we've done it kind of in different versions. The students pick one family member to focus on and create like a digital scrapbook page.
Mm-hmm.
And then that they would present that to the class as well as any family members that were available to come in for that family day. So it was so
So
cool
cool.
to see the kids learn so much about their families, to take an interest in one family member in particular enough to be able to tell that story,
Mm.
and then to see their additional family members come in to support. One of these girls, I think she had like 6 people show up for her presentation. It
Oh
was
wow.
so cute. And they were just so proud of the work that she had done. And
Yeah.
sometimes the family is learning alongside her. Maybe these are stories she's uncovered that they hadn't even known were out there in a newspaper article or a
Yeah.
photo or this or that. So to me, those are the programs that are important. And I think that targeting that age definitely comes from that personal experience and regret of like, oh, if I could just go back in time and record all
Mm.
the things that my grandpa said, he may have more legacies than just chopping off his toe. He may have
Yeah.
more cool stories that he would rather be known for. But you don't know
Yeah.
if you don't sit and ask those questions.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say is that these avenues, whether you're looking at your family history, through like an ancestry.com or a family search, right, .org, these are just inroads to conversations. Like the end game is not that the percentage of Scandinavian that you are or the percent Mexican that you are or whatever ethnicity or nationality. Like the end game is to use that information to ask the right questions, to find more out about the people that are in your life or that were part of your history, and to learn their stories and to keep those stories alive. Like it's one thing to go out and look for information and to ask your mom or your dad for basic questions about your grandparents, when were they born, right, so that you can do some digging on like a family search, right, because you need basic information to even start doing that research. How do you encourage people to take that next step though, and to like have the conversations? Because it's like, even in my experience, I can ask my grandparents point blank some questions, and maybe they're unwilling to share. Like in your experience, how have you helped families to kind of overcome those barriers or roadblocks, or whatever that maybe the older generations are hesitant to share, especially around trauma? I know that's a big thing.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And the unfortunate thing about what you find or don't find as you start your own family history research is that if your family didn't upload documents or photos and stuff, you might be really frustrated, and whether that's because of hidden trauma, or just because of lack of resources, or just
Yeah.
any of it. That's the hard thing about diving into this, is there's not always this wealth of information that you hope to expect to
Mm.
find. The further back you go, there can be more, because there's then other branches of that family that may have carried on those stories and legacies in some way. But I think it's equal parts important to start looking into your family tree and into the past as it is to document your current family tree, because
Mm. Yeah.
we can't go back. We can't ask someone 100 years ago to have saved, to write their name on the back of that photo, because now we're holding
Hmm.
it and we know that it was important, but we can't figure out who the heck it is or why it's important.
Yeah.
And that happens with photos, and it happens with heirlooms, whether it's a tea set or a clock or piano. There's generations that now have possession of significant items that have lost their significance because the story is no longer being told.
Mm.
So it's just this all encompassing thing of where it is very much a give and take of, you have to, if you want to find out information, you also kind of have to participate in sharing information. But
Yeah.
that's where it does get a little hairy. And we had been running a monthly genealogy group, and this topic came up where one of our members had a wealth of information from either his dad or granddad, and was at the level where he was ready to kind of share it somewhere, but he didn't know where, he didn't know who would care. And because in family histories there's crazy stuff, there was some reference to a murder,
Mm.
something unflattering,
Yeah.
and he's like, what do I do with that? I've gone to all this work and documented all of our family history, but like, if I post it, is this going to offend somebody?
Mm.
I said, it's, if
Yeah.
all of his information that he was going off of was public information, it wasn't a ton of personal documents or anything.
Hmm.
So I reminded him of that most of this information is publicly available, whether he posts it to his
Yeah.
family tree or not. But that, I encouraged him to share it and take that chance. And if somebody had a problem with that, then hey, you're at least getting a genealogy conversation out of it.
That's right. That's right.
We should be so lucky to think somebody would care so much. But the information is what it is. And I think that, we do, as we learn our own family history and get better at our own skills. I'm definitely not a professional genealogist,
Mm.
have a lot to learn. But as you get more advanced in that learning, it's a very like participatory kind of situation. You have to share even,
Hmm.
your mom's photos from, their wedding 20 years ago, 40 years ago,
Hmm.
or whatever, because, eventually kids or grandkids might be having all those same feelings that you are, wanting to connect with the past.
Yeah.
So that's my bit of advice, is even if you can't go as far back as you want, like, don't get discouraged and start at least with present day and documenting this history.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I love that you brought this up, because it's another thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, there's one thing to go back and to learn your family history. And then there's another thing to sort of be forward thinking and to know that maybe someday there's going to be somebody looking back and wanting to reflect on your life. But when you contrast, you know, our ancestors from 100 plus years ago who had a couple trinkets, very few photos that even could have been preserved, and most of that probably not preserved, to today, I've got 20 plus thousand photos on my phone. I mean, there's a wealth of just things, right? We just have more stuff. Like, if a family is really wants to take this seriously, like, how do you even go about consolidating those things? Whether it's your photos or your physical mementos, like, I don't know. Can you speak a little bit to just how you've seen families go about this, how maybe your family goes about choosing what things to preserve for the future and how, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, it just seems like such an overwhelming process.
it's wild, you get these situations where there's just so many things and none of the kids want it. And then you get
Mm,
situations where there's one sentimental item that kids are fighting over and ruining relationships over because
yeah.
everybody wants this one token for various reasons. So it's really tricky. I think that yeah, like in old days there just wasn't as much stuff like you said, so things had more value sentimentally and just literally. And now if we don't have the
Hmm.
stories of those, why those were valuable or sentimental, it's just another thing to us.
Mm,
We don't attach that much importance to it. One of the things that like my mom made me do after I moved away from home was she said, Aimee, I have a giant bag of all your stuffed animals from childhood in the attic. And now that you're on your own, you can come and pick that up. And I said, no, I'd rather not. Like, you
yeah.
keep it.
Yeah.
You keep it. And she goes, okay, well, then I'm going to throw it away. And I said, well, no, like, no, I want you to keep it, but not throw it
Yeah.
away. But like, I don't want it. I
Yeah.
don't want to keep, what am I going to do with a
Yeah.
bag of stuffed animals from
Yeah.
and luckily in the day of modern technology, we compromised and I took a photo of each stuffed animal and then we lovingly sent them away.
Yeah. That's right.
Because I just
Yeah.
couldn't. I was like, in an
Yeah.
apartment, like, where
Takes
am
up
I going to put a
space.
bag of stuffed animals that are,
Yeah.
at a certain point, they start getting a little creepy too. Let's just be honest.
That's so
What
good.
was once cute
Yeah.
now is like haunted in
Yeah.
some way.
Totally. I know with one of our daughters, we have like her very first lovey, and it's like she would chew this thing so much. It's
Yes.
ratted and torn, but it's like, I think where I'm even processing as we're talking is like, I think you start with the stories. So whatever stories are meaningful to preserve, if there's an object or a trinket or some sort of heirloom that's associated with that thing that can help keep the story alive, like, it's the thing is not the value, like, it's the story and it's the connection and it's the history, right? Like, so if you're a
Exactly.
family and you're struggling, you say, oh, I want to do this, but there's so much stuff. Like, I would personally start with what stories are worth preserving. What are the stories that I want my great 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 grandkids talking about? And is there
Yeah.
something that is associated with that story that I can, meaningfully preserve, intentionally set aside, or make sure that
Yeah.
it's, and because, yeah, otherwise you're just, and that goes for photos, it goes for, things
Yeah.
in your house, whatever. So,
And that's really a big part of, I've always been an antique lover. My mom always took us antique shopping and thrift shopping and all of that. So definitely running a museum feels very natural because it justifies being able to buy all kinds of weird antiques that I would not fit in my house anywhere because with
yeah.
4 kids, it's amazing that I even have a home office here. But essentially it just really is a matter of like honoring each item and not just packing it away in your closet and storing it for that next generation to inherit and have no idea what it was because they never saw it around the house or this or that. So I really encourage people, if they just don't have the capacity for all of the stuff,
Hmm.
to try to find maybe even a museum or a local historical society that would take it.
Oh,
There's
wow.
even
Yeah.
it, whether it's somebody's discharge records from the Civil War. I mean, that's amazing that it survived this
Yeah.
long. I was on some page that actually had found somebody's, I think it was from 1840, and it was like their actual medical degree certificate,
Oh my
and it
gosh.
was
Yeah. That's so cool.
on sheepskin. They said it wasn't even paper; it was like actually on sheepskin at that point
Yeah.
in time.
Save
So I
that
mean,
thing. Yeah.
that document, whether you can reconnect it with that family or not, like
Yeah.
belongs in a museum. And that's what is hard though, is that extra work that people have to do to find the right home for these things that are
Hmm.
special. And then that's why so much of that stuff ends up at thrift shops and estate sales
Mm.
and this and that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
certainly trying to make a use or a display of whatever it is that has that memory and connection, but also trying to find those other people, whether it's within the family or the community, that could help honor that object and keep that story alive. Because what I've really found important in what we do when we share our stories, it's not like, oh, my family's so much cooler than yours, so let me just talk about them for 500 years.
Yeah.
But I feel so, I mean, which I could, and my family is pretty cool. But, if you meet somebody who knows nothing about their family, they get to live vicariously through those memories,
Yeah.
because people's lives, had the same kind of parallels back then as we do with each other nowadays. So being able to share the story of Pearl and her tragedy, other people, whether it's, my friend that lost her 14-year-old daughter, or whether it's, other people who have family tragedies, they can feel a connection with that. And that all of a sudden, like, okay, it's okay to talk about these things, and these objects can remind us of, you know, uh, both
Hmm.
situations of life, the beauty and
Hmm.
fragility of it all.
So great. So great. So let's wrap up the work that you do at Pearl Center for Creative Arts by talking about one thing that you're really passionate about. If anybody follows you on social media, they will have seen this talked about for a long time, and that is the Murrieta Train Project. Tell me a little bit about what you're trying to do, and I know that you're very close to doing, very close to accomplishing. But talk to the people about the Murrieta Train Project.
Yeah, I would love to. So, definitely, the goal here has been to create a physical space in Murrieta for people to come to of all ages and explore their own family history, participate in workshops, see exhibits from local artists on different kind of cultural topics. But the struggle has been finding that place. In Murrieta, there
Mm,
are so few historic buildings left standing, and with so much of our local history really having been centered around the railroad, and some of my own personal family history being really centered around the railroad, just kind of had this idea come to me that, embracing our motto of bringing history and art to life, quite literally, we would bring a actual train car to Murrieta and open that up to be our cultural arts center. So,
so
not
cool.
just a train that's like sitting there to look at as a relic, but something you can actually go inside and, kind
Mm,
of a living history museum, if you will. So, as I got more involved with our local history and learning about the railroad and all of the floods that washed out the railroad tracks, it was so interesting to me. And also, there's just been no landmark in our city that would really
mm,
signify that. We have an old, decrepit grain elevator by where the old train depot used to be. But other than that, there's just not a place that signifies that a train ever ran through here. And there's just not really a place for people to go and explore local art, or
mm.
learn how to be better at their own art, or so
Yeah.
many things, even just engage with other folks. I mean, we have a lot of really cool restaurants around, and play and wineries in Temecula. But like, if whether you have kids or not, if you want to just go meet up with a friend or go have some time for yourself, like, there's just not many places you can go that aren't
Yeah.
incredibly expensive. And then add a friend or add four kids into the mix, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
it's just impossible. So, the vision was really so much of just creating this physical space that the community can come together in for a variety of reasons, celebrating art, local history. We do have a history museum, but it is so focused on Murrieta's history. And it's great, but we also have so many people that have come to Murrieta that aren't really part of the founding history, but that are really important, to our community and have stories to share. And there
Hmm.
are a lot of conversations around like displacement of peoples as well. So I
Hmm.
do focus on this kind of pioneer period of the late Victorian era and trains and all of that.
Mm.
But I think it's really important to recognize that for every generation of pioneers that came to a new place to settle, a whole other culture was then displaced and forced somewhere else. So
Yeah.
those conversations are really tricky, and they really have to be told by the people who experience them or the descendants of people who've been displaced. So really a huge goal in this Murrieta Train project is having a space where all cultures can come and tell their stories themselves. I do admit I share a lot about Pearl because that's what I know. I can't share about people that I don't know. It's not my place, but I am doing this focus on Pearl as kind of a template or kind of an inspiration of like, look, this is what I would love our community to join me in celebrating somebody from their family, and celebrating, in a very loose term of not everybody has this like happy celebratory life, but just celebrating that we have come from somewhere collectively. Yeah. So certainly in Murrieta, it's a huge indigenous American population, and then the Spanish, and then, waves of immigrants coming by train from other countries, from other parts of the country. So I really hope to have just a lot more participation in this project as it grows with its awareness, and as I get a physical space for people to come and share those stories. That's been really important to me. So finding a space in Murrieta to park the train, so to speak, is not without challenges, but we did have an offer from a local historic site that we're working with to try to get our train placed in Murrieta in early 2025.
Amazing.
That's the goal that we're working towards. It's awareness is the hardest thing, because everybody that I talk to is like really excited about it and is like, when do you open? But I just can't have those conversations with everybody. So it's, the small business, small museum struggle of like, you've got a great idea, you've got this big vision, and it's just how do you get it put out there into the community so that other people can be excited about it too. So that's been a huge part of what I've been trying to do with the social media, and trying to put myself out there a bit more and share some of my personal stories so that other people can kind of feel connected to that and feel like it is exciting that there's going to be a space that other artists and community members will be welcome to participate in that fashion. Yeah. And then, it's a train, so that's just cool in and of itself. It's just cool. So.
Yeah. And this would be, it's like multiple cars, I would imagine, to be able to do all the things that you want to do in that space.
That's the funny thing. Originally, I was looking at train cabooses because I'm like, honestly, that's kind of the coolest part of the train, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But there's not a whole lot of room in train cabooses to run the kind of operation I want to do. I have very big dreams. So with the generous support of our friends at the Southern California Railway Museum, they have offered our nonprofit a 90-foot dining car.
Oh my gosh.
So I've been told that I had to go and pick the biggest train car that existed. It's like 170,000 pounds. And so moving it is clearly going to be the hardest part of this whole project, but it's also really exciting because once the train car is in place, we're there, we're set, we're up and open and operational. It's just, the fundraising to get there. But I try to stay optimistic, and I try to tell people, it's all part of the journey. So, if I had $1 million and I could move the train tomorrow and open the doors, like, would I? Well, yeah, probably, but also not, because then I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't be meeting all of these other people along the way that, are going to be there as supporters when the big hairy dream finally comes true. So it's, the journey has to be enjoyable. Otherwise, why do it all? I almost kind of feel like once the train car is there, it's like, well, then shoot, what am I going to do with all this energy? Like, I don't have to move a train anymore. What do I do with myself? But that's when we'll really pick up the steam with more of those kind of Teenealogy themed programs, and be able to engage other organizations to work with us. And at some point down the road, when we get to become big enough of a nonprofit with our funding, I would really like to have some kind of partnership with a tuberculosis awareness group, because
of course.
my understanding is it's still a very bad problem in a lot of countries. And so we kind of feel in our day and age like,
Mm,
that's ancient history, but
mm,
it's still devastating to many
yeah,
people in current day. So, I got to get the train moved, but once we do that, it's certainly something I'm looking forward to in the future, to have some kind of awareness or partnership with an organization that helps with that cause in particular.
that's great. Well, best of luck with the rest of the process. Hopefully, maybe people watching this right now, the train's already in place. You can already go visit it and, see Aimee's incredible vision come to life. I have one more question for you, and that is, you've worked with so many individual families and seen the fruits of what getting interested in your family history and uncovering more of those stories can do for individuals, right? But if we had a community of people, an entire city of people or region of people that were really interested in this stuff, like what do you think that could do for that community and society at large?
I think it could be really exciting because there are a lot of people that are into this, but they're all kind of divided right now into these tiny niche groups, whether
Hmm.
it's in their city or in their county. There's a lot of us genealogists that really want to share those stories and share our experiences and tips with each other. So,
Hmm.
um, I've tried the genealogy groups, I've tried other things. It's just really difficult, I think, to do things that are a one off, like a once a month, a once a week kind of event, and be able to time it well enough to get those niche people into your group. So, my hope and belief is that having a physical space within this train car that's open during regular, kind of operational hours, like people will be able to come in there and have those experiences and share those stories more regularly, because it really is important to have a place to connect. And I think that these stories, while online forums and family search and ancestry.com are great places, wealth of
Hmm.
information and tools within them to connect with other members and whatnot. It's really those in-person conversations that have the most impact. And what I've really seen too, kind of going back to the whole storytelling thing, is when I meet somebody and I give them an opportunity to share their story, when I say, what was your grandpa like, or what's a
Hmm.
funny family story that you guys have always told, I'm interested in it, but it's actually almost like a gift that I'm giving the storyteller, because storytellers at any age, they're reliving that experience for themselves while they're
Yeah.
telling it. And it's amazing. So it's like, if you want to time travel, if you want to see someone else time travel,
Hmm.
you just go ask somebody to tell you a story and watch them. I mean, they're
Yeah.
reliving it, and it's beautiful. So I think, the heart of it all is having those interactions and having, like I said, the captive audience for the story, and
Yeah.
just that place where it's okay to tell that story, free of judgment.
Over the years, I'm sure you've worked with countless families and seen just so many cool stories, the light bulbs going off, people uncovering, stories about their ancestors. Do you have a particularly like funny or memorable story from your time? I know it's hard probably to just pick one, but if you could, do you have one that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, I love every story that people share with me. And it's been really encouraging that as I've shared more about my family history, and maybe not Pearl, but on the other side, on my grandma's side, some of her family grew up in San Jacinto locally and in LA and Pomona. And so as word caught on that I was sharing these family stories about actual local history, I got invited to speak at the Hemet Historical Society to talk about my grandmother's time at what was actually an old ostrich breeding farm in Hemet.
Uh,
And so I was very lucky to have a memoir from my grandma that she wrote and self published. And my mom had helped edit it for her before she passed away. So, in referencing some of the stories from that book, I thought it was just very really amusing to hear how my grandma talked about growing up in Hemet, and there was a story about riding the bus, how it was this older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Peoples, were the bus drivers, and that they were pretty stern and strict, and she clearly didn't like that. But the one of these bus rides, or many of these bus rides, these little French boys, these neighbor boys, would start some mischief, and when the bus driver was distracted, they would unhitch the spare tire off of the back of the bus. But they would time it so that they would unhitch it right at the top of the hill, so it would like go rolling down the hill and just away. And then they would all be, laughing, but like secretly laughing. It was this, little thing. So while my grandmother didn't participate in it, she felt, I guess, that, kind of, like she was in on it with these kids, and that gave her that kind of sense of kinship. But then writing this as a grandma, she was reflecting on how awful that must have been for Mr. and Mrs. Peoples to have finished this bus route and then have no idea where this spare tire is. And at that time, Hemet was just, tall grass and stuff. So how the heck they would have even found it? And I'm almost a little, sometimes we get a little embarrassed for our relatives. So I was almost even like a little embarrassed that, she had a part of this prank. And then the best moment came when a guy stood up from the audience and is like, those were my grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Peoples, the bus drivers. He said, and he's currently trying to write a book about them as well, and their times in Hemet and their family story. And so we obviously had to exchange numbers, and I made sure that I would get him those copies of that story because he hadn't heard that. And it's, that was a moment that I love so much, because I keep teasing that I'm waiting for these moments where, somebody in a room I'm giving a presentation to is like actually my cousin, or, some kind of shared relative. But this was so cool to see our families not related, but have this connection that was so poignant and so just cherished.
So cool.
I just loved that. Yeah, I was totally embarrassed by it too, but I was like, hey, it's history. I guess one of the, lesser things to be embarrassed about in your family tree. But it is funny how we carry that guilt a little bit on behalf of them. But it was awesome, and it was really great to just find that shared connection.
Yeah, I love that. That's kind of maybe a hidden benefit of, not just knowing your own history, but sharing that with others, because you like uncovered a connection with someone in a room that you never would have uncovered had you not shared that story. And so I wonder if, at a community-wide level, if we started sharing more stories, how many of those connections we would uncover.
Definitely.
So, obviously you're not just, like you said earlier, you're not just going to walk up to some random people and start talking about your grandparents' story, and in the hopes of finding some random connection. But
although I have to be honest, Sean, I feel like I have started to become a crazy genealogy lady, because I won't hit you with it right away. But at least, towards the end of a conversation, I might be like, so your last name is really familiar. I have someone in my family tree with that last name. Is your family from, Norway? Are they from this? Are they? And
you set up their family search account right there in front of them.
I just can't, it's, I got to say, the legacy that I think I'm passing on is the one that my mom and grandpa had of the storytelling, and just making sure to always embarrass your children by having these conversations, at the grocery store with a random stranger for like 30 minutes. And now they're your best friend, and your kids are like, I just want to go home and have dinner, Mom. So that happened to me so much growing up, where I'm just like, Mom, why do you have to talk to everybody?
Yeah.
And now that's me. So, the legacy lives on.
I love it. Well, that about wraps up our conversation today, Aimee. I'm just so thrilled to have had you as a guest, and anybody watching, we're going to link Pearl Center for Creative Arts and anywhere else you might find Aimee on social media. We'll put that in the description of the video. Aimee, as we wrap up the conversation, is there anything you'd want to tell people, just last words of encouragement or advice to get interested in their family history and why they should do it?
Yeah, definitely. I think the best thing to do is to not feel intimidated by what you don't know and just start with a simple question. If you are lucky enough to have people still around you that you can't ask, start with the oldest family member and work your way from there. Um, so that's my biggest advice is have those actual conversations with the people while you can. Something I do have to remind myself and a lot of other family tree researchers do is those conversations with the living are so much more important than getting on family search or family history and
Mm,
and searching that family tree, because not to be rude or morbid, but those dead people are still going to be dead tomorrow. The people that are
mm,
alive today are the ones that really should be the priority. So have those conversations, but then take it to that next level. And, Sean, I know you hear me on this, document it, record those stories, write it down, do something with it, because as much
mhm.
as we think that we have like a really good memory, we all have terrible memories. And I know I'm
Yeah,
not alone in this. So, with the best intentions, you're still not going to be able to capture that story and retell it in the same words that the original storyteller is. So, yeah, definitely
yeah.
just have those conversations and then call Sean to record it for you or record it yourself, because
There we
that's how
go.
it stays alive for sure.
There we go. Shameless plug. No,
Yes.
that's such a great word, Aimee. I think the focus should absolutely be on the people that are with us, and certainly there's no harm in doing some digging and finding out more about our history. But if we're doing that at the expense of people that are here in our family that we have the opportunity to talk with, if you have a relationship right now in your family that is strained or you're estranged, like just take the first step. If that hits anybody who's watching this, just mend those relationships, and we'll all be better off for it. That's for sure. So, Aimee, I want to thank you so much for your time today, your generosity, your just exuberant energy, and best of luck with everything Pearl Center for Creative Arts related. Certainly the Murrieta Train project. I can't wait to visit that myself in person once it's
Yes.
placed. And yeah, everybody watching, we'll see you in the next episode as we talk all things connecting generations within the family. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sean.
See you, Aimee.